that the meeting can be recorded.
This meeting is being recorded.
So yeah, good evening again, and it's 7:15 and it's Thursday, 17th of November 2022, and it's the WINDRUSH National Organisation public engagement meeting with the Home Office. I'm sorry we're not taking questions at the moment, Cherry, so we're not responding to hands up at the moment when we're doing the introduction. I do apologise. So what we're doing today is the Home Office are here. We've got Gabriella Monk, who is the head of WINDRUSH operations for the Home Office. And we've got Ben Shotness, who's one of their policy advisors. And Ben will be presenting the WINDRUSH compensation scheme. The purpose of presenting the compensation scheme is to let you know what the compensation scheme is. It will also let you know what the criteria is, what the eligibility is, and how you can access the scheme. Those are the questions that we've been asked over the past week. So this evening, how it's going to work, when I stop, we'll hand over to Ben Shotness from the Home Office. I will ask you, first of all, to listen to his presentation. Once his presentation has been made, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Now, we finish at 8:30. Importantly, please use the sidebar to put all your questions and comments in, and I'll tell you what happens to those in a moment. But importantly, I'm not going to give way for questions, I'm afraid. So can I ask everyone to put their hands down at this point? What will then happen is, after the presentation is made, you will then have an opportunity to ask questions. You will also have an opportunity to put your questions in the sidebar. Those questions will then be collated and they will be sent to the Home Office for responses. The recording tonight will go onto our YouTube channel tomorrow morning. It will be there as an official record of tonight's meeting and for you to refer back to it as well. The questions that go to the Home Office, they will respond to them. They will be posted on our website as well. And the video will be embedded onto our website also. So it will be there in the public domain. Last thing, a couple more things very briefly. At our conference on the 28th of October in Birmingham, we launched a WINDRUSH Welfare Fund. Those of you tonight would have had not just the link, but you would have been told that we are a voluntary organisation and we've launched this fund to help us to help people. So it would be appreciated, even if it's £1, if you donate that to us. We're not charging you for tonight's meeting. We don't charge people to assist them. One thing we do are resources to do that. So please consider doing that. Our bank details are on the email that you've had, and also as well our crowdfunding page as well. So please have a look at that, and Charlie will put that into the chat as well. After this evening's meeting, the Home Office will tell you how you can contact them. If you feel that you require assistance with a compensation claim, if you email us, and the email address will be in the chat, and it's the WINDRUSH National Organisation @gmail.com. If you email us, we will then find one of our advocates around the country or one of our legal clinics to assist you also. And finally, please adhere to the instructions that we give. We want to make sure that you have your opportunity to speak, but we've got to do it orderly. The other thing as well that I need to ask you is that let's have some respect for each other. Not saying there isn't, let's have respect for each other. But on our meetings, we've had issues in the past, and we now operate a zero tolerance approach to any form of abuse. We've had people come into the meetings and racially abuse others. We've had people coming, shout, swear. We're not having it. You won't even be warned. You will just be removed and you will not be let back in. And we report people to Zoom, and then we get them blocked from coming into our future meetings as well. So it is zero tolerance. So let's have a constructive meeting, everyone. And thank you all for joining us this evening. And I'm now going to hand over to Ben Shotness from the Home Office, who's going to present to you what is the WINDRUSH compensation scheme. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Bishop Jadu. I am actually here. I've come on my phone, but Ben will do the presentation. But just to say thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you very much for the background. We do work really constructively with the Windrush National Organisation. We recognise that the Windrush Compensation Scheme has been set up because of injustices that people have experienced, and those injustices are definitely part of the Home Office's fault. But we still believe that there is a role for us to play in administering the scheme, making sure people have access to the compensation. And we want to work really constructively with community representatives to make sure people can access the scheme and can get compensation that they're entitled to. The scheme has a degree of complexity to it, but it is a scheme that is accessible. And what we're hoping to do tonight is just explain a little bit more about the circumstances under which people are entitled to access the scheme and to get compensation. So we've put some slides together, and Ben's going to run through those with you. And as Bishop Jadu says, we'll go through those and then we'll take questions at the end. What I would also say is the scheme operates as it is currently. We've worked really constructively with the Windrush National Organisation and other organisations to make changes to the scheme. But the scheme is operated under the terms which are set by the government. That doesn't mean we won't continue to work on how we might make changes, but it operates under the rules as they currently are. So although we're open to talking about changes, what we really want to explain to you is the scheme as it is, what it covers, what it doesn't cover, who is eligible and who isn't eligible. And Ben, I'm going to hand over to you now to do that. So thanks very much for stepping into this.
Thank you, Gabby. Good evening, everyone. As Bishop Jadu said just a minute or two ago, I'm part of the policy team here at the Home Office, overseeing both the compensation scheme and also the Windrush status and documentation scheme as well. My main focus in my role at the Home Office is on is overseeing actually the status scheme, but I'm also closely involved in the compensation scheme. So I'll hopefully do justice in setting out the basis to both schemes. I'm just going to load up our presentation. So just ask if you could bear with me for a moment. Hopefully that's all visible to everyone. Yep. Brilliant. So just to give a very brief run through of what I'll be setting out, we'll talk quickly about the Windrush status and documentation scheme and the eligibility for that and what that does. I will run through really just the basics of the compensation scheme in hopefully as simple and accessible a way as possible. I'll talk a bit about eligibility, the different categories of compensation that the scheme provides, and we'll also talk a bit about the support that we have for vulnerable people and just generally for claimants to help them make a claim for compensation. And then we'll also run through the steps that individuals need to take if they think they may need to make a claim for compensation. So to just start very briefly on the Windrush status scheme, which I know very well as the policy lead on it. The purpose of the Windrush documentation scheme is to help people access the documentation they need to demonstrate their immigration status. It's open to individuals free of charge, and there are a variety of products that people can obtain under the scheme. And what you can get depends on how you fit into the eligibility criteria. So first of all, the main group of people that the scheme is aimed at is Commonwealth citizens settled in the UK by 1973, and also their children who have either been born in the UK or came here before the age of 18 and have lived here continually since then. That is really the core group of people who were impacted by the Windrush scandal and may have experienced difficulties demonstrating their status. Just to give a very brief bit of background on that, essentially these groups of people do have a status in the UK, but often would not have obtained the documentation they needed to evidence that, because this was a status that was conferred through legislation. So if you're somebody that fits into that group of either being a Commonwealth citizen but came to the UK pre-73, so often termed the core Windrush generation, or a child of somebody in that position, you can apply for a document to confirm that you have the right of settlement in the UK, and that document will help you to access employment, accommodation. It will help you to access banking services.
Ben, can you unmute, please?
Can't hear you, Ben.
Apologies, very sorry for that.
Ben, can I just stop you there, please?
Yeah.
People are coming into the meeting and you're coming into the meeting muted, and then you're unmuting and we're picking up background noises. Please, if you come in muted, remain muted. And those of you, when you're not muted, please speak, because please remain muted, because people need to hear what Ben's saying. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very sorry for that. It's a bit tricky doing the slides at the same time, so I'm not sure how I ended up on mute there. Really, I was trying to give a very quick overview of the Windrush documentation scheme. Core facts of the Windrush documentation scheme are that it's open to Commonwealth citizens that came to the UK by 1973, and also their children who either were born in the UK or arrived in the UK before the age of 18 and have continued to live here. People in that group can apply for documentation free of charge to confirm their status, which will then allow them to access all of the different services that they may wish to in the UK. And they may also apply for British citizenship free of charge, although the normal eligibility requirements for British citizenship, which apply to everyone, continue to apply, and they include certain requirements around residency in particular. The scheme is also open to any other person who arrived in the UK before 1989, who may also have no longer have an up-to-date document demonstrating their settlement in the UK. If you're in that group but you're not a Commonwealth citizen, that's absolutely fine. You can still apply for a document free of charge confirming your right to be settled in the UK. Let's just move on to the compensation scheme. I think as many people know, it was launched in April 2019, and the aim of the compensation scheme is to ensure that individuals who experience difficulties, experience losses as a result of being unable to demonstrate their status in the UK are properly compensated. And you can apply for the scheme first and foremost if you individually experience some sort of loss because you were unable to demonstrate the status that you did have and the right that you did have to live in the UK. You can also apply for the scheme if you're a close family member of somebody in that position. For instance, if you're a partner, child, or a sibling. You may also have had knock-on impacts because of your family members' issues. And if that applies to you, you can also claim compensation, even if you didn't personally experience any status issues. And finally, the scheme is also open to representatives, of the estates of individuals who have sadly passed away, but would otherwise have been eligible for compensation. So just to expand on that a bit further, just like the documentation scheme, the basic eligibility requirement for the compensation scheme is that you can be an individual of any nationality, don't have to be a Commonwealth citizen, who has arrived in the UK before 1989, lawfully settled here, and you experienced some sort of loss or impact because you were unable to prove that you had the right to. Apologies, I could see I just went on mute again. I'm not sure how that's happening, so I'm very sorry about that. I was just trying to set out in a bit more detail the eligibility criteria for the compensation scheme. The main eligibility group for the scheme is individuals of any nationality who arrived in the UK before 1989, lawfully settled here, and who experienced a loss because they could not prove their right and their status to be in the United Kingdom. In addition to that core group of individuals who arrived before 1989, the scheme is also open to children and grandchildren of Commonwealth citizens who settled in the UK before 1973, in cases where they experienced difficulties demonstrating their own status. Just to explain a little bit why we have that category, certain, if you are a child of a Commonwealth citizen that was settled in the UK pre-1973 or a grandchild, then you would most likely have British citizenship. You may alternatively have indefinitely to remain in the UK, but either of those statuses would have been gained as a result of your parents' or grandparents' status. And therefore, if the pre-1973 person experienced an issue and was unable to prove their status, that may have also trickled down to their child having issues themselves, a grandchild also having issues, for example, being unable to gain a British passport. So that's why we include that category of people in the scheme. There's no limit on when somebody could have come to the UK, so the 1989 restriction doesn't apply to that group of people. The scheme is also open to close family members of an eligible person falling into one of the above groups. And as I explained a little bit earlier, the point of the close family member element of the scheme is for people who didn't actually experience issues demonstrating their own status, but who experienced a loss or a difficulty because they needed to support a family member who in turn experienced a status difficulty. So for example, if your parent or spouse experienced difficulties, they may have been reliant on you for potentially financially or for other reasons, and therefore you may have an entitlement to compensation as a close family member. And as I said earlier, the scheme is also open to representatives of estates of individuals who would have been eligible for the scheme. So to just move on to categories of compensation, the scheme is an extremely broad one and covers the very wide range of aspects of a person's life through which they may have experienced some kind of difficulty because they could not prove their immigration status. And in order to account for these different areas in which a person may have been affected, essentially a person can raise a claim under as many categories of the schemes they wish to. So if you had, for example, a difficulty accessing local authority housing, there's a category of the scheme that addressed that specifically. If you're unable to access NHS treatment because you couldn't demonstrate that you were settled here, there's a category of the scheme that addresses that, and so on and so forth for all of the various different categories that you can see on the screen. There is also a very important category, which is the impact on life category, which deals in a very broad sense with the overall impact on a person's life, including non-financial aspects. So of course, if somebody experienced difficulties over a long period of time, and we know sadly in some cases individuals experience difficulties over a number of decades, the impact on life category addresses that overall damaging impact on a person's life, and it's the part of the scheme which offers it's one of the elements of the scheme that offers a particularly large awards of compensation. So just to clarify a few of the key messages, individuals can claim under all or any categories. There are no restrictions. Whatever difficulties a person experiences, they are catered for under each of these categories. We will sometimes get cases where an individual experiences an impact which doesn't quite neatly fit under any of these categories, and that's why we have what's known as a discretionary category, which ensures that we can properly compensate for any kind of issue, even if it's one that is quite unusual and isn't covered under one of the other categories. Obviously, as you can see here, you know, I think the breadth of these different categories and the different elements of a person's life that they address is indicative of the fact that actually some compensation claims are extremely complex and involve all different aspects of a person's life and different time periods. And unfortunately, that is a factor in the amount of time that it takes to process a claim. Essentially, the more complex the claim, the longer it will take to process it, but that doesn't in any way deter us from our aim of processing claims as quickly as we possibly can. And just to clarify another very important message as well, there is no end date to the scheme. It will be open for claims indefinitely. Yeah, so as I just said earlier, we do work hard to ensure that claims are processed as quickly as possible, and that we pay compensation awards at the earliest possible time. But equally, or even above that, our biggest priority is to ensure that people receive the maximum amount of compensation that they're entitled to. And this is one factor in claims taking sometimes if they're some time if they're particularly complex to resolve, because we will proactively go out and engage with potentially other government departments, former employers of the person involved, in order to gather as much evidence as possible so that we can make as big a compensation award as possible. So I'm aware that one of the issues with the compensation scheme that is often raised is the complexity and the need to fill out a very detailed application form. I think we fully recognise that it may be daunting for individuals to be faced with a long application form, a long claim form, and to have to provide very large amounts of information potentially in order to help us make an award. I think that is unfortunately a necessity in order to make sure that we're gathering as much evidence as possible, which allows us to ultimately make as big an award as possible to individuals. But we do have very substantial support available in order to help people navigate that process. And we do have a claimant assistant provider who are We Are Digital, who are an organisation that can provide essentially bespoke advice to individuals who want help, either general guidance in filling out a compensation form or making a claim, or more in-depth assistance with filling out the form itself and gathering the relevant information. Another service that We Are Digital can provide concerns probate. So I mentioned a slide or two ago that the scheme is open to individuals applying for compensation as the representative of an estate. Intestacy law or estate law is unfortunately very complex. It can be quite difficult or a complex process for individuals to gain the legal authority to represent a family member who has sadly passed away. But We Are Digital are there and available to help individuals to get probate and to get that authority to represent an estate, which allows individuals to then make a claim. And we also have provision in place to reimburse legal fees if that's necessary in order to get somebody probate. So there's very substantial support in place for individuals. In addition to our claimant assistance provider, We Are Digital, who are there for all customers, we do have our own in-house WINDRUSH helpline, who are available to help you if you're thinking of applying for either documentation or compensation. I would suggest that, as a very general rule, the WINDRUSH helpline are the best point of contact if you're unsure whether you're eligible for the scheme, you have fundamental questions about how the compensation scheme or the documentation scheme work, and you want to try and understand that. The WINDRUSH helpline will be very capable of giving you a bespoke answer as to whether you as to what you may need to do in order to claim for either status or compensation. But of course, we do have We Are Digital as well, and their main function is on helping people who have made a compensation application or who have decided they wish to make a compensation application fill out that claim form. In addition to this support for all individuals, we do have dedicated support for those customers who have a particular vulnerability need or need extra support in order to access the WINDRUSH schemes. So if you contact the WINDRUSH helpline and you do need extra support, they will pass you on to our dedicated vulnerable persons team, who are able to provide that specialised support and advice for more vulnerable people or for people with more significant needs who do need extra support in order to make a status application or compensation claim. And in particular, the vulnerable persons team are able to provide support and advice on housing, advice on accessing mainstream benefits. And we are also in urgent and exceptional cases able to provide financial support. So no individual should be in a situation where they're experiencing hardship or they are unable to meet day-to-day costs and are unable to wait for their compensation claim to be processed. We do have that urgent support. It's available. If you think you may do that, I'd absolutely urge you to get in touch with the WINDRUSH helpline, who will be able to look into that for you. So just to conclude our presentation with basically the key contact details on how to go forward if you do want to make an application. We have the Windrush helpline. They are probably the first point of contact if you have questions or you're not sure whether you're eligible. They're available Monday to Friday, 9 AM to 5 PM, and also available over email. And as I said, We Are Digital, our claims assistance provider, are on hand to then help individuals fill out application forms. Thank you very much. That concludes our presentation. So I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that. Greatly appreciated. So how we're going to do this now, we'll got Reverend Clive Foster, our Vice Chair, is here. Now, the first thing is, WNO affiliates and members, you will not have priority to ask questions tonight. The priority will be given to people who are on this call, particularly for the first time. The reason is this is for them to ask questions who haven't had an opportunity to engage with the Home Office previously. So anyone at all who's affiliated WNO, I'd ask them to put their hands down, because we do need to ensure that the people on the call are able to ask questions. They will be having the priority, and we agreed all of that. So at this point, I'm going to ask Reverend Clive Foster to take the meeting from here, and you'll take the meeting to 8:25 when it'll be handed back to me. So at this point, everyone who wants to ask a question, and I think Reverend Clive will reiterate this, either put your comments in the sidebar, which I explain what happens to those, or put your hands up and we'll get you to ask questions. Now, importantly from me, please ask questions, please be as succinct as you can, and please, this isn't an arena for you to discuss any intimate personal business. So please just keep it, use a little bit of wisdom, but I know you've got your questions. So Reverend Clive, over to you, and good evening, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Bishop Desmond. So if we could encourage that most people can go off camera, it will help the bandwidth, and hopefully we can get better reception. And we're going to go with the first hands up. As we've mentioned, please keep your questions succinct, and we'll try and get as much response to you as we can. So I'm going to go with Jenny Barr, and then after that, Denise Wisdom. Jenny Barr, if you can come forward, yeah, with your question, please.
Thank you. So just to clarify, if you've got documentation that means that you are a citizen and you've never had any issues with evidencing anything, you will not need to apply for this. Is that correct?
Gabby, are you happy for me to take this one?
Yeah, Ben, that's great. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So yes, that is correct. So the purpose of the compensation scheme is to provide compensation to people who personally experienced an issue if they were unable to demonstrate their status. Now, I think we're all very familiar that very unfortunately there are a large number of people in that position, but there are also many people who are members of the Windrush generation or children of members of the Windrush generation who have lived in the UK without experiencing issues. So we do just need to be very clear that eligibility for the compensation scheme, or should I say entitlement to award under the compensation scheme, is purely for people who experienced difficulties because they were unable to demonstrate their own status and who lost out on things like employment or access to housing or access to banking services or NHS care as a result of that. The scheme is, however, also open to close family members of people who experience difficulties. So if you experienced some sort of issue because you were helping a family member who themselves was having status difficulties, then you would have potentially entitlement to compensation. So there is an exception there. And I think, as someone has pointed out, there is, of course, as I said in my presentation, a provision in the scheme for representatives of estates. So if you're representing an estate of somebody who experienced issues, then of course the compensation scheme is for you. But otherwise, if you personally didn't experience an issue, then you are unlikely to be entitled to compensation, and there's certainly no need for you to make a compensation claim. However, if you potentially are not a British citizen, obviously a lot of people will be, but if you're not a British citizen, you would like citizenship, then the Windrush scheme is open for you, and we want people to apply for citizenship and to get that, irrespective of whether they had status difficulties.
Clive.
Okay, I think we've got the gist of that. Hello, okay, I think we've got the gist of that. The lines in and out. I'm going to go to Bev DeLucci to come forward and ask your question. And then after that, Doreen. Bev DeLucci.
Can you unmute yourself, Bev, please?
Yep.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, thanks,
You
Bev.
can hear me?
Hi.
Right.
We can,
My
thanks, Bev.
question is,
Yes, we can.
regarding, somebody said something about legal fees. Now, if you, just correct me if this is right, if you need to have a solicitor involved and have those kinds of legal fees, you have to pay for them first and then they reimburse you?
So just to clarify, and Ben, correct me, if we help with legal fees regarding probate, we believe that the scheme's accessible, the Windrush compensation scheme and the stated scheme are accessible, and people shouldn't need legal advice to make their claim. We don't refund legal fees for accessing the scheme because we believe the scheme is accessible without legal advice. That's how it's been designed. What we help with in legal fees is if you need help with probate because you're claiming on behalf of someone who's passed away. Does that help, Bev? And Ben,
Yes.
just correct me.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, Gabby. So yes, sorry, I did refer to legal fees earlier. So I wasn't totally clear.
So what if you can't find any papers? You literally can't find the papers. But
Okay, yeah, so that's a really good question, Bev. So what we try and do is we will check with other government departments for anything that can support your claim or a family member's claim. So we'll talk to DWP about benefit records. We'll talk to HMRC about employment records. And anything you can get, we'll work with you to try and corroborate that. But we recognise, you know, most people don't keep documents for 20 years, 30 years. And particularly if you've had a period, if someone's unfortunately been homeless or they've had to live in different people's accommodation, you know, you can't keep stuff. Things get lost. So we will listen to people's stories, we'll work with people on the balance of probabilities to try and establish things. So what I would say to anyone is do not be put off because you don't think you've got the documentation. We'd much rather people claimed and we try to work with them to find out the evidence we can. I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks, Bev, for that question. I'm going to bring in Doreen and after that, Shelley. Doreen, if you can unmute.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes. So I'm looking at people who've got parents in their 90s and came over, and housing was a big issue, as we know. No Blacks, no Irish, and no dogs. In terms of that category, would that be the category of impact on life? Where would that category fall into? And also discrimination in terms of housing and in terms of employment. Particularly, I know that my mother came as a nurse, and she was asked, you know, that the Queen stays, we hear that you people stay in trees. When the Queen comes, where does the Queen stay? And my mum had to say, well, we put the Queen in the highest tree we can find, because this is the discrimination that she experienced. Where does that leave my mother in terms of this? She's now 94 years of age and living in this country with that kind of discrimination, and perhaps has never spoken about it, only to her children. Where do we fit in?
So Doreen, I recognise that, you know, people that came in the 50s and 60s, they did experience awful discrimination, just like you've outlined. The Windrush compensation scheme is not about discrimination, although I do totally recognise it's terrible. It is about people who suffered because they couldn't prove their immigration status. So people who suffered discrimination and racism, that isn't what that scheme's about. maybe that's something that we should move on to in the future. And maybe that's something that this group, the Windrush National Organisation, will think about campaigning about in the future. But this scheme is specifically about people who couldn't prove their status and who experienced discrimination because of that. Now, I don't know your mum's circumstances. If she came here and she worked, but she experienced racism in terms of housing and in terms of work, she might not be eligible, but I'd still say make some inquiries with us, because we'd want to work through, particularly thinking of your mum's age and the service she's given living here. If there's anything that we might be able to help with, we'd want to talk to you about it. But generally speaking, this isn't just a general discrimination scheme, is the principle.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Doreen, for that question. I'm going to bring in Shelley, and then after that, Caroline. So Shelley, if you could unmute and ask your question, please.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to know a bit more about, you said something about if somebody hasn't got their citizenship, they're able to apply even if they haven't got their status in the country. Like, for instance, if they're on leave to remain, are they able to apply for the citizenship?
So Ben, let me bring you on that.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that question, Shelley. Yes, so if you fall into the eligibility categories for the Windrush scheme, so if you're somebody that came from a Commonwealth citizen, from a Commonwealth country pre-1973, then you may be entitled to a product under the scheme. You wouldn't necessarily be entitled to citizenship. As I said earlier, there's eligibility for the scheme, but in order to qualify for citizenship, you do still need to meet the normal statutory requirements for citizenship that apply to everyone, and that does include having to have settled status in the UK. So it's not possible for somebody to gain citizenship directly if they're not currently in the United Kingdom with indefinite leave to remain. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they should not apply for the Windrush scheme, because they may actually be entitled to a grant or eligible for a grant of indefinite leave to remain under the scheme, which would open the pathway to citizenship further down the line.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that question, Shelley. I'm going to bring in Caroline, then after that, Abazia Brown. Caroline.
Thank you. Right, so I'm basically on this call on behalf of my father. My father has been recognised as he is one of the people who was discriminated against in the hostile environment. So it has been recognised. I think that we're at the point of, we've done the application form, we're at the point of trying to prove work that he's done throughout the years, and that seems to be our sticking point at the moment. And getting communication coming back from the Home Office has been very, very challenging in this. So what would you say is, I think we've got revenues and benefits that are supposed to be coming back to us. My dad's supposed to also go have a psychiatrist talk to him to prove that this issue had a major effect on his life. So there's a number of different things that we have to show the burden of proof, but we're not getting anything back from the Home Office in regards to what's the status of his of your findings, basically.
Okay, so we won't talk about your personal circumstances here, but I will just put my email address in the sidebar. So if you would like to drop me an email, I will check on what's happening with your dad's claim and come back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to type it now. Bear with me.
Thanks for that, Caroline. I'm going to bring in Abazia Brown and then V. McLean after that. Abazia, if you can.
Oh, hello. Thanks for taking my question. I'm just wondering about the status of people like myself who were born in the Caribbean with British citizenship, arrived in the UK as a child on a British passport. And in my case, when I applied to have the passport, to have a new British passport, to have it renewed, I was told I had lost my citizenship because, Jamaica was now independent. So I had to reapply, I had to apply to be naturalised before I could get a British passport. But I feel I should not have lost that in the first place. I shouldn't have lost my citizenship in the first place. How does this compensation scheme apply to people in my situation?
Ben, are you okay to come back on that about status?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the position here with citizenship, obviously, Commonwealth countries were previously British colonies. And at the time that they were British colonies, people who are from Jamaica, from Nigeria, Trinidad, all of those countries would have held essentially British nationality in exactly the same way as a person within the UK. What then happened, as you briefly outlined, when countries gained independence, is people who were connected to those countries, but who were not connected to the UK in the sense of having been born in the UK or having parents who were born in the UK. They may have been living in the UK. Generally, they would have lost British nationality and would have gained the citizenship of those newly independent countries. So I believe that that is what happened in your case. Now, we don't compensate for that under the compensation scheme. So that wouldn't be an avenue to compensation. However, you would very likely be eligible to make a free application for citizenship under the Windrush scheme. So if that's something that you'd like to pursue, and I appreciate your, I totally empathise with your point of view that you feel you should have had British nationality all along. But we do have that scheme there, which allows people in your position to make a free application for citizenship without the need to take the various tests that individuals normally have to in order to get citizenship. So that is there for you as an avenue that you can pursue.
Thank you. I already have citizenship. Thank you. I dealt with it within my 20s.
Oh, sorry, misunderstood.
Thank you, Abizar. A very important question that you raised there, and one that we are seeing a lot of queries about. I'm going to take V. McLean, and then I'm going to bring in Carmen Franklin. V, if you want to come on and ask your question, please.
Good evening to the panel and everyone. I'm sure everyone is aware of the TikTok messages that are going around, and we want to know, how can we be sure that the people claiming to be from your organizations are legitimate? How do we know they're not duping us? And can we check if they're affiliated to yourselves?
Can I answer that, please? Am I allowed to answer it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, V, I'm not affiliated to the Home Office, and I was affected, and I'm part of the WINDRUSH National Organisation. So I can tell you that our the WNOs and the members are not affiliated. We're real. We're here to help. We want to get whatever confusion was out there. We want to get clarity. This is the main reason why we held this meeting and why the organisation was made, in order to help the people who's been affected. We have monthly meetings. WNO has monthly meetings in order for us to get answers for the people who are affected. I do challenge the Home Office for the people who's been affected, and they can tell you, and I do give them problems. I'm sure Gabby can tell you, and so can Ben, because we want to get it correct for the people who's been affected. So there's no affiliation. This is real.
No, sorry. I think you misunderstood me. It was not you're affiliated with the Home Office, but there are people claiming that they can help you to actually claim the compensation. Yeah. And they're saying that, I want to know if they're affiliated to your association. They say they're part of the Windrush scheme. So how can we check that these people are legitimate people? And then, how do we know they're not connected to you or are connected to you? Is there a way we can check that they are?
That's simple. You go on the WINDRUSH National Organisation website and you can see the members. Yeah. We've got a list of the members. And if that person's not on that list, then they're not part of this organisation.
Right. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenda. Carmen Franklin, if you can come through with your question, then I'm going to bring in Dr. Enobong. Carmen, if you want to come on and ask your question, please. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you, Carmen. Hopefully you're speaking into the microphone. We just can't hear you, Carmen.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes. Go ahead.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes.
Good. Right. My question is for several people. So my father is one of the people that came to the UK before 1973, and then he left in 76 and returned in 78, and he had to reapply for his citizenship. So I want to know, would he be eligible for the scheme? Because then he had to reapply, and he was quite shocked because he assumed he was a British subject all along, because he was born in Barbados before it became independent. He came across to the UK, he lived, he worked, and then he stepped out for 2 years, and then he came back and he had to apply. Would he be eligible?
I'm happy to take this one, Gabby.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So I think similar to the previous question, and I don't want to kind of over speculate when I don't know the exact circumstances of your father's case. Citizenship is quite complex. In general, there are many individuals who would have held British nationality prior to their home country's independence from the UK. And what generally would have happened is when those countries gained independence, they would have ceased to have British nationality, and they would have started to have nationality of those independent countries. So that's not something that the compensation scheme compensates for, that change in nationality status. However, he should have still had the right of settlement in the UK if he was living here. So if he experienced difficulties demonstrating that, then that's absolutely something that he would be able to pursue compensation for.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmen, for that question. I'm going to bring in Dr. Eno Bong, and then afterwards, Josephine.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for holding this. I'll try not to be personal, but like the previous caller, my mum and dad came from Barbados and Nigeria to work in the health service in the 50s. We were both born here, and because elders passed away in the late 60s, they went to visit to bury elders, I mean, both grandfathers. And on returning from the country they went to, their documents were taken away from them at point of re-entry, and they didn't go for 2 years or 5 years or whatever. They literally went for funerals and came back. So my mum's 91, and she has now, like last week, got her passports under the scheme. Well, I think it's under the scheme, but she has applied through the scheme, and she has got her passport back after 70 odd years, 60 odd years. So do my siblings and I, we've not been able to travel with my mum to visit other elders that have passed away, sisters and brothers that have passed away. When she has gone, it's been difficult to get back in because we're often seen as foreigners, even though she's lived here since the 50s, was a nurse here, etc. My father passed away. Do we qualify as the children of my mum and my father for them not being able to travel whenever they wanted to go abroad? We were born here. We've always had British passports. Is that
So Liz,
clear?
I'll bring Ben in a sec. So I'm really sorry to hear that, and especially with all the service your family's given. If you've had trouble travelling, it's potentially that there are potentially opportunities for you to claim too. But what I would encourage you to do is to get in touch with us, either dropping an email or making contact with our helpline. Ben, did you want to add anything?
Sure, yes, I would just add to that. I don't want to be too absolute in setting you down a particular path, because we only have the basic info that you just gave us. So I'd absolutely encourage you to contact our helpline. But it does sound like if you were a British citizen, it seems your status wasn't in doubt or wasn't disputed, but you experienced a knock-on impact because your parent had difficulties travelling. So if that's the case, then yes, you potentially would be entitled to compensation, not as the child or grandchild of specifically as a close family member. So that would be the element of the scheme that would be appropriate for you. But
I mean, it's not just travel, it's also applying for jobs, you know, starting off as a nurse and working all those years, then coming back in the country and being seen as a refugee, which is, you know, lots of people are refugees, and I don't disrespect any refugees, but my mum was born British, my dad was born British under the Commonwealth, and worked here, had children, and then popped home to bury parents, and then lost their status, which has now been returned to them. But we've lived in, I'd say, poverty growing up because of the impact it's had on not being able to apply for jobs, not being able to apply even for benefits, because we're looked at as outsiders.
Sure, absolutely. So there would potentially be a claim for compensation for your parents as primary claimants, and then there would potentially be one for you as a close family member. Unfortunately, it's difficult for me to say anything more absolute than that, based on what you've told me, just because the circumstances are particularly complex, where somebody has travelled overseas and then come back to the UK. Absolutely doesn't preclude getting compensation. It just is more complex in terms of the status a person would have had. But I would absolutely encourage you to get in touch with the helpline, who will be able to direct you further with making sure you can make the appropriate application.
Thank you, Dr. Inebong. I'm going to bring in Josephine, and then after that, Letitia McIntosh. Josephine, if you want to come on.
Thank you, Josephine here. Just to put my question to Ben Shockness, it's regarding his PowerPoint presentation. In it, he mentions at the beginning that there's a Windrush documentation scheme, and he also speaks to a Windrush compensation scheme. Now, we are aware that there are 3 long application forms that people are required to make a selection and choose which one is to be filled in. The primary claimant, the representative of an estate claim, and also close family members claim. Now, Ben, you're speaking about 2 schemes, Windrush documentation, Windrush compensation scheme. How do these 3 forms, when people have to make a choice of completing one of them, do they automatically cover both of the 2 areas you discussed in your early PowerPoint slide, please?
Thank you. Yes, I'm very happy to clear that up. So the status and documentation scheme, it's an entirely separate application form. It's a very brief application form, just a couple of pages, and that's entirely separate as compensation. The reason why we have the 2 separate forms is not, you know, I appreciate that maybe at face value that might seem a bit counterintuitive to have different forms, and maybe that would seem confusing, but it's simply because there are many people who are entitled to status who don't necessarily wish to claim compensation and wouldn't necessarily be eligible for compensation. So there is a logic behind there being 2 separate sets of applications. But essentially, if somebody would like to apply for status, there's one form, the Windrush scheme form. It's a very short form that they can submit, and entirely separately, if they'd like to make a compensation claim, then they would choose from one of the 3 compensation claim forms, depending on whether they are a primary claimant, a close family member, or they're representing an estate. And people can pursue either of those 2 things at the same time, or whichever order they choose to. And of course, you know, it's difficult for people to be making a status application and also be going through a compensation form. We recognise that. That's why we have our helpline, and that's why we are digital to assist people with doing that.
But you're saying the normal pattern of events would be that if someone wants to apply to the compensation scheme, then it is useful for them to submit the earlier Windrush documentation scheme 2-page application form. So in effect, they would potentially be doing both simultaneously.
It's absolutely, you know, it's not there's no requirement if somebody believes they're entitled to compensation to go through the Windrush status scheme. the point of the status scheme is if somebody wants to actually have a document to demonstrate their status. Some people won't need that because they were able to get one prior to the Windrush scandal coming to light, or because they're already a British citizen. So it won't be something that everyone needs. It's there if somebody needs a document right now in order to demonstrate their status in the UK, or if they wish to pursue citizenship. So it's really it's a separate need. It addresses a separate need to the compensation scheme, which obviously is about people getting compensation rightly for the difficulties they experienced.
And it's probably just worth adding, Ben, thanks for that, that if people come in on the status scheme, we will refer them to the compensation scheme. And if people come in on the compensation scheme and we think they also need to sort out their status, we'll direct them there as well and help them with it. So I know dealing with bureaucracy in government departments is always difficult for people, and I recognise that people contacting the Home Office is an even bigger challenge. But we do try and make sure that we pick up whatever we think people need and send them to the right place or deal with them in the right way as well.
Thank you for your question, Josephine. I'm going to go to Pamela W, and then afterwards we've got Cyrelline Campbell. Pamela.
Hi, it's Pamela. Sorry, there's an extra L there. Don't worry. My question is really in relation to the collection of the data and the stats. What happens with all the information that you will be collecting, the Home Office will be collecting over the next likely years with all this data? And will we be able to have access to it? I'm a researcher by background, so it would be interesting to know, you know, the breakdown of all the information that will be collated, especially following today's meeting.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Pamela. So we do publish data quarterly on the scheme and on the status scheme. And obviously, if you as a researcher want extra or additional information, you can always submit a Freedom of Information request. And so long as it's not incredibly costly to gather the information, we'll provide it. I think we're really interested in what the scheme's telling us. So there is data out there on gov.uk, which is published quarterly. I think our next quarterly stats are out next week. But I would say if there's anything specific you want from a research perspective, an academic perspective, you can, excuse me, you can ask.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Sarah Lee Campbell. Probably got that name wrong. And then after that is Africa.
Hiya.
Go ahead.
It's Sigrid Lee Campbell. Okay, cool. This is the first meeting I've been to. I've read some of the documentation. It's been really good to get some clarity on who can claim and who can't claim. But whilst I was listening to the attendees there, two things struck me. One is the burden of proof. It seems to be key. The question I have, if you're going for the Windrush compensation claim, I'm hearing from Ben, yes, you could possibly get that, but then it wouldn't necessarily mean that you'd automatically get a British citizenship. You would have to apply for it. And if you apply for it under the same status as everybody else. I'm not thinking of the majority. I'm thinking of those few who have probably not been able to access any services, no longer got documentation, but may have witnesses, maybe some have long gone, but witnesses who could state they've been in the UK, come from the Commonwealth, or further afield, which is attached to Britain. What is their position then in gaining British citizenship if they didn't meet the requirement and didn't meet the requirement based on their circumstances and what they've been through? So the point I'm really trying to make, if I'm giving you all of my information, I mean, That information, you are the Home Office, and the Home Office has got a reputation which isn't that brilliant. I'm happy that you're doing this, but I can't also ignore past failures. And a more recent one was the Jamaica flights and Rwanda. So I'm talking about people who feel themselves very vulnerable, would probably get the Windrush compensation, but wouldn't necessarily get British citizenship. And I'm wondering how you're balancing the two.
Gabby, I'm very happy to address the question on citizenship if you're happy for me to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes, it's a very good question. I'm glad you raised that actually, because there's some very important points here that I didn't make in my presentation, which I think are worth setting out. So as I said, the Windrush scheme does allow people to apply for citizenship free of charge. So it's not quite a case of just the normal rules apply to everyone. We recognise that members of the Windrush generation have a particular connection to the United Kingdom. Many of them would have experienced very significant difficulties as part of the Windrush scandal, and therefore it's only right that we make access to citizenship free of charge. And we've also removed various other requirements that individuals would normally have to meet, including a knowledge of life in the UK test, language qualifications. We've removed all of that. So if you're a Windrush applicant, in principle, you can apply for citizenship free of charge and you don't need to meet certain requirements. Beyond that, the point that I was trying to make earlier, and I'm very sorry if this wasn't clear, is there is a set of laws around essentially who can be a British citizen and what their circumstances must be in order to qualify. And that mainly, there are several different areas that focuses on, but it mainly focuses on a person having to be lawfully settled in the UK at the time they apply, and they need to have been living in the UK for a certain period of time over the last 5 years. Now, you raise a very important point there, that there will be some people who potentially, because they were caught up in the Windrush scandal, that might actually mean that they're not able to meet those requirements. And it's just important to say that for each of these requirements, there are elements of discretion that are built into the legal framework and that are built into Home Office policy, which means we are able to waive certain requirements. So there are, I won't name individual cases, but there have absolutely been cases where people didn't actually meet the residency requirements because they had been caught up in the Windrush scandal, but we've nevertheless granted them citizenship. And we expanded the basis on which we could do that under the Nationality and Borders Act, which came in this year. So just to be absolutely clear, in terms of eligibility for citizenship, the normal, the same laws apply to everyone, and that's something that's set by Parliament rather than Home Office policy. But there are lots of elements of discretion to ensure that we get to the right outcome, because what no one wants to see is somebody being refused citizenship because of something that isn't their fault and actually is the Home Office's fault. And that's a scenario which we hope we have prevented from taking place.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Look, now, colleagues, we're down to the last 6 minutes, and we've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands up. Let's see if we can get through these hands. So Africa, if you can go forward, then John Dan, then Hoslin, if you can get ready.
Right. Good evening, everyone. So my question is towards Ben. In your PowerPoint, you mentioned that people who arrived to the UK in 1989 and has experienced loss, they can claim. Now, in this situation, it's regarding if you have any family members who they have kids and grandkids who are British citizens, but they were deported and had no refuge. Are they able to claim compensation themselves, or can the kids or grandkids claim compensation?
Thank you. So the main reason or part of the background to why we have a part of the scheme that addresses the children and grandchildren of pre-1973 people is because if a person came to the UK from the Commonwealth before 1973, that had a very particular impact on the status of their children. So it would typically mean if the children were born in the UK that they would be British citizens, and if they came from overseas as children before the age of 18, they normally would have been granted settled status in the UK. So there's a very specific set of circumstances around the children and grandchildren of pre-1973 Commonwealth. Those circumstances are not the same for children and grandchildren of people who arrived after 1973. So to put that in the form of an example, if somebody came to the UK in 1980, their child wouldn't necessarily, in the same way, have gained the right to live in the UK, through their connection to their parents. So that's the reason why that category of the scheme is very focused on the pre-1973 Commonwealth citizens. Now, of course, the scheme is still open to individuals of all nationalities who arrived before 1989, and there may be circumstances in which somebody has a close family member claim as a child or a spouse or sibling of somebody in that group. But I think your question was more getting at why we have this arrangement for children and grandchildren of pre-1973 Commonwealth people. And the answer to that is their circumstances are very particular and specific, and they would have gained status because of their parent status as Commonwealth people who came before 1973.
So with the 1989 category, would that be like a different compensation scheme?
No. So it's the same compensation scheme. So if a person came to the UK before 1989, let's say for the ease of separating it from the other category, after they came to the UK after 1973 but before 1989, they absolutely can claim for compensation, but the entitlement to compensation must be because they did have settled status in the UK and they experienced difficulties demonstrating that. So if a person experienced difficulties because actually they didn't have settled status, then they wouldn't have an entitlement to compensation. So I hope that's clear. It entirely depends on what their status was and whether they experienced difficulties demonstrating it. But absolutely, in principle, if a person arrived before 1989, they could be entitled to compensation.
Right, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I'm putting everyone who's got their hands up still on notice. We've got the last 3 minutes. So John, Dan, if you come forward, and other colleagues, you may not get your question, but we'll see if we can get the next 3 in. Go for it, John.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, excellent.
You're off mute, John, but we can't hear you.
I'm on mute?
No, I can
we
hear
can hear
him.
you now. Go for it.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, great. Okay. 2 questions. One, for those people that need to come down, I think you've got an event going on in Ealing or somewhere where you're going to be able to fill out forms on the day.
Yeah, so we do try and run quite a lot of events with partners who are in the community, and we try and send representatives from our teams to be there. So that request for Ealing is definitely one we've got on our books to try and get there. Does that help,
great.
John?
Yeah, what I wanted to know, can we have some kind of idea of what we may need on the day, like a Q&A checklist, like a checklist for those people that are coming down?
Okay, so what I'd say is, if you can look at the gov.uk site about what you might need, try and get some of that stuff there, but don't fret about it too much. Just come, make the claim. We can work with people over the next period of weeks to get the evidence they need. We don't expect everybody to have everything the day they come. We recognise a lot of this stuff's hard to find. We've talked about it earlier that, records might go back over years. I'd much rather see you and have you come, members of your family come and make a claim, get you logged in, and then we can work with you to get the information. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. Because I came in late, I didn't get much of the beginning of the presentation. Okay. So I just wanted to know again, what was the situation with those people that are no longer with us?
So people who sadly have passed away, we can work with the representatives of their estate to make claims on their behalf. So whoever's dealing with the estate, you know, the executor, the administrator, people who've got probate, even if that's not been sorted yet, come and talk to us about it. Okay.
Right. Okay. And then just one other thing. If I've got somebody who actually wants to have, like, maybe yourselves or somebody come down to actually talk about the situation, and we've got a venue representing Ladbroke Grove. Ladbroke Grove, the area of Ladbroke Grove.
Yeah. So we really do try. Obviously, we've been working with the Windrush National Organisation for a long time. But if people are going to run community events and you want someone to come from the Home Office to be there, as much notice as you can give us makes it easier. But we will try and get someone there.
Okay.
Okay.
So who would I need to contact with that?
So I've put my email address in the sidebar, but it is, or you can get in touch with Bishop Jadu and he can pass information on.
John, can I just say, Dan, can I just say that I will be present on that day, giving a presentation of how to complete the forms.
Well, if you're there, that's fabulous.
Yeah, I will be there, Debbie.
Okay, thanks. I want to get these last three hands, and then we're going to have to close. So, Huslin, if you could come forward, if we could get your question, and then Cameron, and then Egbert. Thank you. If you speak, Huslin, we can't hear you, but you're off mute. Keep speaking, we can't hear you. Huslin?
In the compensation generation, grandchildren. Can you hear me now?
Keep speaking. Yeah.
Yeah. In the Windrush, you got categories for children of the Windrush generation, grandchildren of the Windrush generation. However, you've not got for great grandchildren. I think it's quite relevant, that category for great grandchildren. What's the justification for not having a category for great grandchildren? Because I'm coming across a number of them.
Yeah, so I saw that was a comment you left in the sidebar. The scheme doesn't extend to that at the moment, but it's not. I'm not promising we could do something about it, but it's not necessarily something we couldn't look at. At the moment, most of the people where we're thinking of the generational changes since the 50s, it kind of does get down to grandchildren. We've not seen masses of stuff about great grandchildren, but if you think there is some evidence, happy to look at it.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Cameron.
Hello. Thank you for giving
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Cameron.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Keep speaking. We can hear you.
I'm a little bit disillusioned by the scheme. Now, this affected me in 2016 in a serious way. Employment, impact of life, and also banking. And I put in my claim in 2020. And also I received a call from the Home Office telling me that I was eligible to make a claim. Now, just 2 months ago, I was then told that everything was refused on errors, total errors on all 3 of the categories. I was refused. Now I want to ask this question. How many people are denied their applications? How many people are denied?
Thanks, thanks, Cameron.
So a really quick response. It's about, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about 50% of cases get paid.
50%, right, okay. So with regards to myself,
why did they come to you?
Because the Home Office knows precisely everyone who has been affected. Because I had to go through the Home Office to the point where after making 4 attempts, I was told, do not reapply until you can prove who you say you are. And that proof meant to have a valid and current passport, which I did not have. So I was in limbo until I had to go to my MP, who said, Cameron, oh, we're sorry, this is not supposed to affect people like you. I lost my business, I lost quite a few things. Now, I have been refused and told that none of this has impacted on me. Can you explain to me how that can happen?
So I can't explain that to you here and now because we don't talk about people's personal cases. But if you want to email me, I can get someone to have a look at your case, give me some info, and I'll talk to you about it. Is that okay? We just don't use these calls to talk about people's personal circumstances. It's not me fobbing you off, but I'm happy to talk to you, but just not
I've
here.
decided not to go any further, but what I'm trying to put is that you make us jump through hoops. You made us jump through hoops in the first place after the policies of 2011 by Theresa May, okay, which has affected us all. You've told us to apply, we've applied, then you tell us that it's not, our applications are not valid. So I want to know how many people are actually going to go through the hurt, more trauma, because they've been refused after actually undergoing trauma from the policies which were implemented.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, what I have to say to you is the scheme is set up with certain parameters around it. It doesn't necessarily compensate for all the things that everybody on this call would want it to compensate for. What my main aim is in how we deal with it is that we make sure that the people who are eligible get payments.
And he is eligible most definitely under impact, and actually we will pay.
Yeah. So Cameron, can I just jump in here? Yeah, just for time, we're going to have to sort of cut this. I would take up the off.
Sorry, I've lost you. You've gone.
You're frozen.
Okay, I'll step in, Cameron. Cameron, you've had an offer there to email Gabriella. If you wish, you can send an email through to us and we'll have a look at it and we'll forward it. All right. But, you know, the offer is there. You can either contact us, establish contact through us. We will have a look at your claim as well. Alternatively, you will be able to go to Gabby directly. Whichever one, we're happy to facilitate it. I'm going to have to move on, not being rude, because we've gone over time. I'm going to have to move on now. Egbert, you're the last question, please. I don't want to ask you to keep, if we can keep it as quickly as we can. Thanks very much.
Sure, we'll do. Question to Ben and Gabby. As far as the 73/81 cut-off dates go, what is the relationship between right of abode, residency, and settled status? As in, if someone was here before 73, they must have acquired settled status before, etc. What's the link between those three?
Okay, Ben, I'm going to need to bring you in there because it's a good question, but it's a technical one.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. Very unfortunately, immigration and nationality concepts and the legal framework around it is complicated, and we try our best to make it our explanation of that accessible, but it's very difficult because we're unfortunately dealing with just a system that's very complex. But I'll do my best to try and explain the differences between those.
Go ahead.
So essentially, before 1973, and this is a very general position, most Commonwealth citizens that had come to the UK as members of the Windrush generation would have been living in the UK without really any restrictions on their stay. What we then have in 1973 is the creation of two different statuses. Collectively, we refer to these as settled status. So we have indefinite leave to remain and we have right of abode. Indefinite leave to remain is, to put it in simple terms, it's the UK's version of permanent residency. So if you have indefinite leave to remain, you have a permanent right of settlement in the UK. You can live here without time restrictions. You can access services, benefits, all of those different things, just as any British citizen would be able to. However, you're still subject to a level of immigration control. So, for example, if you then emigrated to another country for several years, you wouldn't necessarily have a right to return to the UK. You'd have to reapply for indefinite leave to remain, essentially reapply for permanent residency, much as is the case with other countries who have their equivalent of permanent residency. So that in a nutshell, and I appreciate it's a very complicated thing, and I've only gone into a small element of it, but that's what indefinite leave to remain is. We also have right of abode, which a much smaller number of people would have gained, but essentially that's very similar to British citizenship in that it gives somebody an absolutely irrefutable right to live in the UK. So if you have right of abode, in essence, you have all of the same rights to come and go from the UK that a British citizen has, and that can't be taken away from you, or it wouldn't be affected by moving overseas for a few years. So that's the difference between the two. To try and make things simple, we refer to them collectively as settled status, but I appreciate that sometimes adding an extra term probably makes it more confusing.
No, that's fine. Yep, thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you. Bishop Desmond, over to you.
Right, thank you very much, everyone. It's been great hosting you this evening. Just to clarify on some very quick points there. In terms of the Home Office, they've told you how you can get hold of them. You can also email us at the Windrush National Organisation. You have that on the email that was sent to you with the link. Our contact number is there as well. Hang on a minute, bear with me.
I've done it, Desmond.
Okay, thank you. Right, so our contact details are on there as well. So you can contact the Home Office, you can contact us. We can either assist you. If we can't assist you, we can signpost you to the legal clinics which are available as well that do pro bono work. And we can actually liaise with the Home Office as well. A very good question was asked. What about people who say that they are affiliated to us? Visit our website or email us or call us. The only people who can confirm this information, you've heard from them tonight, there's myself or there's Reverend Clive Foster. We've got other directors, Nigel Guy, Lorna Markland, and Glenda Andrew. But myself and Reverend Foster, when we're absent, we appoint someone else to be that designated appropriate authority, and we will tell you who you can speak to. I know the Ealing event is happening, and I've been invited along. I'm unable to make that, but I know that Glenda Caesar will be attending there as well. So any queries at all, please get in touch with us. Now, importantly, you've heard some of that information tonight. We're not having a meeting in December. Our next meeting will be on the 3rd Monday in January. And one of the reasons for that is when we had our international conference, just to let you have the date now, it will be Monday, the 19th of January, 2023 on Zoom. When we had our international conference, we've got to collect the information and do a report, and then that report will be made public. And in that report will be a series of recommendations as well, coming out of the discussions that took place with all the parties in Birmingham on the 28th of October. Now, just to remind you, and we put this meeting out about just over a week ago, and between 6:15 and 7:30, whilst the meeting's going on, we've had 226 people register. Now, we've been unable to do that. The reason is we don't have admin backup, we're volunteers. And on the email that you had, it talked about our welfare fund. And I urge you tonight on this call, we know we've had nearly 400 people on this call at one given time. And, you know, even if it's £1, donate it, because it helps with the work that we're doing. And we stretch right across the country with this work. And Glenda is down there in London. She's working hard. We've got people working hard up north. Can I ask people, please mute yourselves? And importantly, just have a look at that and give that some consideration, please. So I hope you've had some food for thought this evening. If you believe that you are entitled to claim compensation, then you can either contact the Home Office or you can send us an email. We're quite happy to assist. The gentleman who talked about citizenship and some people being frightened to come forward, I will tell you this now, every single application that I have personally handled, and I've handled a lot, they have all been granted, and importantly, they've never been detained. So you can come through the umbrella of the WNO if you wish for that to happen. So very much on that note, I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening for this meeting. Thank you as well for the impeccable way you've asked your questions, and asked some difficult questions as well, because you get the answers there. I just want to apologize to the 226 people who decided to register at 6:15 this evening for not receiving the link. But, you know, maybe one day we get funds to have a secretariat, you know, we can alleviate that problem as well. But in the meantime, I just want to thank you all for attending this evening. Thanks to Gabriella Monk. Gabriella Monk, just for the record, is a very senior Home Office official. Thank you for giving up your time this evening to come on the meeting. Ben, for doing the presentation as well. Now, the questions in the sidebar, everything will come out of there automatically on our Zoom. We don't have to, it actually comes straight to us. So everything there, all the comments will come to us automatically. The video from this comes to us automatically at some point overnight. As soon as it arrives, we're not going to edit it or touch it. It's going to go up in this authentic state onto our YouTube channel, which if you go to YouTube, type in Windrush National Organisation, it will be there. We will share the link on Twitter and Facebook as soon as the video is available, which should be at some point tomorrow morning. And you can use this as an official record as well of tonight's meeting. So thank you very much. I don't think I've missed anything out. Have I, Glenda, Charlie? Have I missed anything?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Bishop. Excuse me, Bishop. You did say Monday the 19th instead of Thursday for the next
Thursday.
meeting.
I do apologise. Yes, Thursday, 19th of January. That's the date to keep. And, you know, we'll be able to pick up, the Home Office will be with us on the 19th, and we can pick up any points of clarity as well. So the final note goes to Reverend Clive this evening. So thank you. Reverend Clive, over to you to close.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much for your attendance, for your patience, and for your engagement. And you know, we continue to work with you to ensure that there is justice for the Windrush generation and for everyone who's been affected. I would just like to close by offering a prayer. So those of you who wish to engage or to do that, to observe prayer, can join us now. Shall we pray? Father, we just thank you for your goodness and your mercy towards us. We ask that your love, wisdom, and justice will prevail and continue to bless us and guide us as we look to you in this work and indeed in all things. Remember so many people, Lord Jesus, who are suffering, who have suffered. We pray for their healing and for their restoration. And we ask for your strength and your mercy and your spirit to take us forward. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Have a good night. Be blessed. And look
One love. Bye.
after yourselves and each other.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good meeting.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you. God
Thank
bless you.
Good night.
God bless.
Lovely meeting.
Hello.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Night. Good night and thank you. We shall love you. Night. Thank you.
We shall love you.
We appreciate you. You lead.
We shall love you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Yes. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Contacting you. Bye.
Awesome.
Where? Isn't that where I saw it?
Bye-bye. Good.